Hi, my name is Catherine Miller, and I live in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm in the final stretch of completing my master's degree program at the University of Kansas. My master's degree will be in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in reading. And I apologize, I'm going to have to read this. I don't have it memorized, it's written on my computer. I currently hold a Kansas Generalist license, which certifies me to teach grades K through 6. But this past September, I passed my Reading Specialist Praxis exam, and after graduating from this program in December, I'm hoping to get a Reading Specialist designation on my teaching license. I have 10 plus years of teaching experience that began in the Denver Public Schools, where my first job was as a third grade bilingual teacher. I spent the majority of my career teaching students at the middle school level in subjects ranging from Spanish, science for mainstream and gifted students. I also taught social studies, math, and language arts to ELL students in a self-contained classroom. I'm currently working as a substitute in the Shawnee Mission School District in the Kansas City area, but I have not taught full-time since 2004 when I taught Spanish at an inner city high school in Austin, Texas. I entered this master's program at KU in order to update my teaching knowledge because so much has changed in the last 20 years, and I feel that now I will be a much more effective educator with the knowledge and skills that I have gained through my coursework. Today I want to talk to you about a section of my portfolio that highlights CAEP Standard 1.1, which states that candidates must demonstrate an understanding and are able to apply knowledge and skills specific to their discipline. I am choosing to highlight this standard because I think that it is the basis from which all of the other standards originate. The most basic expectation of a teacher is that they will apply their knowledge and skills to coordinate the elements necessary for their students' learning to take place. As most people in education know, Standard 1.1 is more difficult to achieve than the simplicity of its definition suggests. We have all had teachers who were brilliant scholars in their respective field, yet failed to master the coordination of a complex menu of techniques that are necessary for student learning to occur. Although P12 educators have gotten pretty good at quantifying learning through their analysis of standardized test results, there's still so much about teaching that's unquantifiable, yet the presence of those unquantifiable components are essential for effective teaching. Examples of the unquantifiable are the ability to improvise and switch directions midstream. A good teacher knows when it's time to change course by reading their student's mood, their student's level of exhaustion, or teachers also know when a skill hasn't been learned and it needs to be retaught in a different format, or when something has been mastered and students need to be challenged. A good teacher needs to be a cheerleader who encourages students to push their learning beyond their current level, but also one who can sense a student's emotional limits and knows when to pull back. Good teaching is understanding that our skills and knowledge will never be good enough. We must continue to reflect upon and critique our own performance because we are always trying to achieve that ultimate teaching moment when everything is clicking, the students are engaged, and they're excited about what they're learning. I selected Standard 1.1 to highlight because I feel like the two artifacts I submitted for this standard best represent my ability to apply a wide array of knowledge and skills that demonstrate how I teach. My first artifact comes from course CNT 745, Reading and the English Language Learner. In this course, we focused on learning about literacy development, research, and effective teaching practices that support second language learners, and how learning to read, write, and speak in a new language are similar or different from learning the first language. This was one of my favorite courses in this program because, as I mentioned in my intro, I spent the majority of my teaching career working with English language learners. I have an affinity for ELL students, maybe because of the cultural contrast between them and myself. I want to learn from them as much as I want them to learn from me. My artifact is a description of my implementation of lesson plans that were based on the story Baseball in April by Gary Soto. I became familiar with this author during my former teaching career. Gary Soto writes semi-autobiographical stories about his life as a Hispanic teen growing up in Fresno, California. His work is the perfect literary vehicle to connect young Hispanic students with their culture. The students who I worked with were two fifth-grade boys, one of whom was on the cusp of becoming a long-term English learner, which means that he had been in the U.S. school system since kindergarten, yet still wasn't testing at grade level on standardized tests. Originally, I was only going to work with this student who was struggling academically. But using the knowledge I gained through course 745, I knew that one of the most beneficial techniques in helping ELL students is to increase their opportunity for verbal communication. This child was very shy and reticent to speak with me, so I brought another boy into our lessons. The second student was a very enthusiastic learner with good verbal and reading comprehension skills. I felt that by including him in our lessons, that I would be able to encourage greater oral communication from the first student, and I was right. But ultimately, I questioned my decision to include the second boy because his processing was so much faster than the first student's. For example, he would answer comprehension questions with ease while the first student needed more time. However, in retrospect, I still believe that I made the right decision to include the second boy because it increased the engagement of the first student. Other teaching methods that I utilized during these lessons were preloading vocabulary knowledge with the Frere model and word sorting, doing multiple readings of text while doing a think aloud for different paragraphs, showing the students what my thought process was while I read, and allowing the students to use their first language to express themselves in writing when the complexity of their thoughts outpaced their ability to produce the message in English. In reflecting upon my attempt at word sorting with the students, we used vocabulary words from the story, and I gave each of them 6 words and asked them to pair the words, and then they had to explain their rationale for each pairing. I expected that the higher functioning student would do well with this activity, which he did, but I was pleasantly surprised with how well the struggling student did with this activity. Although his processing took longer, he came up with some very interesting connections between the words he paired that were not simple comparisons. One teaching method that I regret not using with the struggling student was a graphic organizer to help him with reading comprehension. We could have filled the organizer in together, and that would have helped him with a retelling of the story. Because although I reread the story 3 times with the students, he was still unable to do a basic retelling of the main events. Another point that stood out to me as I reflected on the lessons was how I will need to work to find ways to make sure that struggling students are able to get their processing time. Perhaps working one-on-one with the struggling student, in addition to the group work, would have been better. One of the days I did get to work with him individually because the other student just happened to be absent, and that was before we started working on the story, so I was able to give him some vocabulary words pre-reading that I think helped him out. The second artifact that I'm going to discuss that also supports Standard 1.1 is from course CNT 842, Supporting Striving Readers. Supporting Striving Readers, Adolescent through Adult. This course is a study of the characteristics and multiple causes of reading and writing difficulties, principles and procedures for diagnosing and remediating reading difficulties, how to provide the individual and group intervention strategies, communicating diagnostic information, and gaining awareness of the impact of research on instructional decision-making for students with reading difficulties. The artifact that I am including is a pre-activity for the qualitative reading inventory. The qualitative inventory is a very effective reading comprehension tool that provides information about decoding, fluency, prosody, and reading comprehension. The information about the qualitative reading inventory is new to me since the last time I taught. Class 842 provided me with some invaluable experience administering the QRI and the pre-QRI activities. Because I don't have my own classroom right now, I was able to work with students from my son's class and with the ELL students, and then another student from a school in the Kansas City Public Schools. The pre-QRI activities that I discuss in my paper that I submitted as my artifact are a book tasting and a card game, which, although seemingly simple techniques, are deceptively powerful tools for obtaining information about a student prior to administering the qualitative reading inventory. For the card game, I created a set of get-to-know-you questions. For example, who are the members of your family? Do you have a pet? Tell me about them. Do you have any books in your house? What are your favorites? Etc. This process took a long time because I wanted to maximize the information I learned about the student without overwhelming the child with a long interrogation. So because I wanted to make it into kind of a game, with one of the students, we played it like a dice game. Whoever rolled the higher number got to choose a card and ask a question. But very quickly, I arranged it so that the student was answering all of the questions. One of the greatest attributes of the card game is that it encourages oral communication by the student, while at the same time allowing the teacher and the student to get to know things about each other. The student has to read the question on the card, so the teacher is also able to gather information about their reading fluency, decoding, and comprehension skills. When I did the card game with my ELL student, I told him if he didn't like the question on the card, that he could make up his own question. And one of the questions he came up with was, do fish sleep? Which I thought was kind of clever, because he actually came up with a real question. For the book tasting, I went to the library and I selected about 20 books of different genres, different authors, different types of main characters, different illustrations, sizes of print, reading levels, etc. I presented the book to the students and I asked them to put the books into one of 3 piles: books that they would read, books that they might read, and books that they would not read. The students who I did this activity with, they checked the books thoroughly. They looked at the back and inside covers. They looked at the illustrations, noted the length of the book. One of the students suggested that he wasn't a science guy, so most of the books that contained expository text were put into the won't read pile, into his will not read pile. He surprised me in that he didn't go for graphic novels, and the main characters in the book that he said that he would read were a mix of male and female characters. The one science book that he put in the would read column was about Jane Goodall, and he chose it because he had read books with the same format before. Like the card game, the book tasting gave me an insight into students' taste in literature, but also promoted oral communication, and it encouraged the student to justify their reading selections by reflecting on the reasons for their choices. The reason that I am choosing to include the QRI pre-assessment activities and the baseball and April lesson plans as artifacts for Standard 1.1 are because out of all of the activities that I did in this master's program, these were arguably some of the most valuable for me because it gave me the opportunity to interact with students and to test different strategies, reflect on my implementation of them, and revise how I would do it better next time. That reflection and revision of implementation is what makes the knowledge and skills a teacher possesses more powerful learning tools. The big takeaways from the lessons related to the baseball in April are, 1, to balance group work with individual work so as to make sure that students who are struggling have enough processing time to figure things out at their own pace. And 2, to use graphic organizers to assist students in their reading comprehension. Big takeaways for the book tasting and card game are, 1, not to prejudge a student's literary preference before asking them, and 2, to use the pre-qualitative reading inventory activities to provide clues about a student's reading ability prior to the actual assessment. The next step in my teaching career is to get a job. Ideally, I would like to work as a reading specialist in the Shawnee Mission School District with ELL students. Last summer, I got some training on how to teach students with dyslexia. I want to pick up some more training in this area so that I can help students who are struggling with that particular learning disability. And if I could combine that with working with ELL students, that would be the perfect combination for me. I have learned so much in this master's program in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in reading. So many things have changed since my last master's degree that I received in 1995. Just to name a few, I've learned about response to intervention, balanced literacy. I've learned about long-term English learners, explicit teaching and think alouds, the importance of developing oral communication skills and vocabulary development, just to name very, very few. I'm so grateful that I've had this opportunity to learn how to be a better teacher, and I can't wait to get a job and get back into the classroom. Thank you.